The entire world thinks he's an angel. They scream his name by his albums and think his smile is pure sunshine. But the truth is different. Ashanti just watched the industry's biggest K-pop idol execute a man in his dressing room with the cold precision of a mafia boss. She's a backup dancer. She was invisible. Until she opened the wrong door. Now Min-Jae says she has a choice. She can disappear forever. Or she can sign a contract that makes her his property. He doesn't want her silence. He wants her. Before he tells her what happens next, he wants to see how far this story travels. The comment section will decide everything. Now, here is how Ashanti trapped herself in the devil's dressing room. Ashanti is 23 years old. She is half black, half Korean, and fully unwelcome in both places. She came to Seoul 8 months ago thinking she was running towards something. She was actually running away. From her mother, who abandoned her when she was 4, because she couldn't handle being the parent of a child who existed in 2 worlds. Ashanti remembers fragments. A bathroom in an apartment she can't locate, her mother's face blurred in the mirror, the sound of luggage wheels on hardwood floors. She remembers the smell of her mother's perfume, something floral and expensive, and the way it lingered in the apartment for weeks after she left, like a ghost that wouldn't commit to disappearing. From her father, who overcompensated by trying to control every decision she made. He was Korean, rigidly structured, obsessed with the idea that Ashanti's blackness was something that needed to be managed rather than accepted. He straightened her hair. He suggested she wear lighter makeup. He enrolled her in dance classes not because she showed interest but because he believed that if she was extraordinary enough, if she was talented enough, the world would forgive her for being mixed. From New York dance studios where girls who looked like Ashanti were exotic curiosities, rather than serious performers. She trained for 12 years. She was technically superior to most of her peers. But in audition after audition, she heard the same feedback. You're beautiful. But we're looking for a different look right now. Translation. Your blackness doesn't fit our vision. Your body type is wrong for our aesthetic. You're too much and not enough simultaneously. She thought Korea would be different. She thought being in a place where her Asian heritage actually meant something might mean her blackness could exist without constant commentary. She was wrong about that too. But let's back up to the moment everything changed. The Gocheok Sky Dome holds 25,000 people. That's 25,000 bodies compressed into a climate-controlled space designed by architects who apparently believed that human discomfort was a feature rather than a bug. 25,000 people screaming so loud that individual voices dissolved into a single organism. One collective sound that resembled prayer more than fandom. The air was thick. Sweat. Perfume. The specific kind of desperation that only K-pop fandom manufactures. It's a desperation born from parasocial relationships, from spending hours consuming content, from the fantasy that if you scream loud enough, if you love hard enough, the person on stage might somehow love you back. The desperation hung in the dome's air like humidity before a storm. Ashanti stood in the wings, stage left, just another backup dancer in a sea of backup dancers. She had learned to make herself disappear. That was the actual skill in K-pop. Not the dancing, though the dancing mattered. The disappearing. She had danced behind 7 different idols over the past 8 months. She had perfected the art of matching energy without taking focus. She could hit every mark, execute every formation, maintain perfect synchronization with 40 other dancers while being completely and utterly forgettable. It was a specific kind of talent. It was also a specific kind of death, the death of the self replaced by the machinery of performance. But Min-Jae had started looking at her. She noticed it in rehearsals first. Micro moments where his dark eyes would find her in the formation, a flicker of attention before he turned back to the choreographer. Just a fraction of a second. But Ashanti had learned to read people the way survivors read rooms, in search of threat or opportunity. She recognized that flicker as attention. Real attention. The kind that made her skin prickle. The other dancers noticed too. There were whispers in Korean she didn't need to understand to know they were about her. Foreign girl. Black girl. What is she doing here? The Korean dancers gave her space the way you give space to something that might bite. The stylist suggested, very politely, very professionally, that she wear foundation 2 shades lighter than her actual skin tone. It photographs better, they said. More balanced. What they meant was, your blackness is too much. Tone it down. The choreographer corrected her movements with sharper language than he used for the other dancers. When she missed a transition by half a beat during rehearsal, he said, "Again. Again. Do it like you understand what you're supposed to be doing." To the other dancers, mistakes were treated as learning moments. To her, mistakes were treated as proof of incompetence. Ashanti absorbed all of it without comment. That was the other part of the invisibility skill. You learned to make yourself smaller when people started noticing you. You learned to apologize for your existence. You learned to accept that your presence was tolerated but not welcomed. Then came the comeback performance. Seraph's new single had been climbing charts for 3 weeks. The album had sold 2 million copies in pre-orders. The entertainment news outlets had been counting down to this performance at the Gocheok Sky Dome, like it was a religious event. And at the center of it all was Min-Jae, Seraph's leader, the face of the group, the reason millions of people had bought tickets to watch 7 men dance for 90 minutes. He wore white. Not just white, immaculate white silk that somehow remained pristine despite the pyrotechnics that exploded around him, the sweat that accumulated on his skin, the hundreds of backup dancers orbiting him like planets around a star. His hair was dyed platinum blonde, almost white, and the costume designer had clearly made a deliberate choice about what they were communicating. Min-Jae looked angelic. Ethereal. The kind of beautiful that made people forget to breathe, forget to think, forget to question whether what they were experiencing was genuine emotion or manufactured ecstasy. He moved through the choreography like he was written in light. Like his body understood geometry at a level that defied explanation. Like he had transcended the physical constraints of being human and become something else entirely. Something that existed to be consumed, appreciated, worshipped. And Ashanti did what she always did. She matched his energy, anticipated his transitions, moved in perfect synchronization with the 40 other dancers, and disappeared into the machinery of the performance. She didn't see the figure approaching from stage left until it was already too late. The man was older, maybe 40, maybe older. His hands were scarred in ways that suggested work rather than accident. His face looked like it had been rearranged multiple times by circumstances that weren't kind. He wore all black, which automatically marked him as staff rather than performer, a technician, a security person, someone whose job was to facilitate the show rather than be part of it. But he was moving with purpose. He cut through the backup dancers with efficiency, with a kind of certainty that suggested this moment had been rehearsed in his mind repeatedly. His trajectory was clear toward Min-Jae. 10 feet away. 8, 6, and then Ashanti saw it. The blade caught the stage light like a secret finally being told. It was a knife, not theatrical, not for show, but a real knife with a real edge designed to enter flesh and cause damage. The man drew it from against his body where it had been concealed, and the motion was smooth, practiced, the motion of someone who had done this before. His target was Min-Jae's back. Time did something strange in that moment. It didn't slow down exactly, but it became elastic, became malleable, became something that Ashanti could perceive in layers. She saw the knife. She saw Min-Jae's back, vulnerable, exposed. She saw the crowd not understanding yet, still singing, still cheering. She saw the security team frozen by surprise or protocol or both. And she saw that no one else was going to stop this. Ashanti didn't think. Her body executed before her brain caught up. 8 months of training told her exactly how to transfer weight, how to generate force, how to move across distance without breaking formation. She pivoted from her position. She accelerated across the stage. She covered the distance in 4 quick steps. She drove her shoulder into the man's ribs with the kind of controlled power that comes from years of discipline and absolutely zero thought whatsoever. He went down. The knife flew from his hand, spinning through the air, landing on the stage floor several feet away. The sound it made hitting the marble stage. A sound of impact and finality, cut through the screaming. And the screaming changed. It was different now. Not fandom ecstasy but pure terror. People realized that what they were witnessing wasn't choreography, wasn't part of the show. This was real. This was danger. This was the moment when performance bled into actual reality. Min-Jae spun around. For a moment, just a moment, he looked genuinely vulnerable. Like the angel persona had cracked open and something human was looking out. His eyes were wide. His mouth was open. He looked shocked in a way that seemed genuine. in a way that seemed to suggest he hadn't anticipated this moment, hadn't planned for this possibility. Then the moment passed. Security moved. Finally, security moved. They overwhelmed the attacker. They subdued him. They controlled the space. Someone retrieved the knife. Someone spoke into a radio. The performance restarted after 40 minutes that felt like 40 years, 40 minutes of chaos, of confusion, of the machinery of concert production breaking down and then being reassembled. But Min-Jae looked at Ashanti, the way a hunter looks at prey that has walked directly into a trap. It was a look that said, I see you now. I see what you're capable of. I see that you're willing to act without thinking. I see that you can be useful. It was a look that said, everything is going to change. Be honest in the comments. If you saw what she saw in that dressing room, what would you do? Comment your first instinct, raw, no filter. I'm watching every response. The dressing room smelled like sweat and possibility. Min-Jae was shirtless. His white stage costume had been abandoned like a snake's shed skin, discarded on a chair as if it had never been sacred, never been the thing that made him angelic. The mark on his ribs where Ashanti's shoulder had connected was already darkening, evidence of impact, evidence of her physical presence on his body. He was looking at himself in the mirror when she entered, not looking in the sense of casual glancing but looking in the sense of studying, analyzing, cataloging. He turned when he heard her, and his expression shifted from analytical to something more calculated. Thank you, he said in English, his accent perfect, like he had learned the language not by living in it but by collecting it, the way someone collects fine art. But you shouldn't have done that. There was a knife, Ashanti said. She stayed near the door. He was going to stab me? Yes. That's why I said you shouldn't have done that. He stepped closer. She backed up. The door was behind her. He was between her and everything else. Do you know who that man was? She didn't answer. He was my father's accountant. He was also the son of a man from the Kongnam clan. Do you know what the Kongnam clan is, Ashanti? He knew her name. That was the detail that hit her like physical force. He knew her name even though they had never spoken. Even though she was a backup dancer, and he was an idol, and their worlds shouldn't intersect outside of choreography and staging and the mechanical repetition of rehearsal. How did he know her name? I'm going to tell you something, he continued. And I want you to listen very carefully. The man who tried to kill me tonight was testing something. He was testing whether my security is as good as he's been told. Whether I'm as protected as my reputation suggests. Whether my father's influence extends as far as people believe it does. You stopping him has created a problem. It's proven that the answer is no. It's proven that a backup dancer can get closer to me than a trained assassin can. It's proven that there's a weakness in the system. Then your security team needs to. My security team answers to my manager, who answers to my label, who maintains certain relationships with certain organizations. Your intervention has exposed a weakness in those relationships, which means someone is going to be very unhappy, which means someone is going to want to make an example, which means that your continued existence has become a complication that needs to be managed. He wasn't touching her, but he was close enough that she could smell him. Sweat and cologne and something underneath. Something that smelled like power, which was a smell she didn't know existed until this moment. Power had an odor. Smelled like certainty. Of you, he finished. The words settled like a weight in the dressing room air. I don't understand, Ashanti said, but she was beginning to. The implications were starting to assemble themselves in her mind like puzzle pieces clicking into place. She had stopped an assassination attempt. She had become visible. And visibility, in a world where people like Min-Jae operated, was dangerous. You will, he said. He moved to the mirror. His hair was matted with sweat, his makeup running, but even falling apart he looked like he was in control of every detail. The question is whether you understand in time to take action, or whether you understand after it's too late. Those are generally the only two options when you become relevant to a situation like this. 45 minutes later, Ashanti was in a car with tinted windows. No explanation. Just a driver who didn't speak. A vehicle that moved through Seoul streets with purpose, and the knowledge that she had made a choice she didn't know she was making. Somewhere between saving Min-Jae and leaving the dressing room, she had crossed a threshold. She had moved from invisible to visible, and that transition was irreversible. The car pulled into an underground parking garage. It descended through multiple levels. Security checkpoints. Cameras. The architecture of wealth and control. The garage smelled like concrete and money. They emerged onto the 47th floor. The apartment was impossible. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Soul spread out below like a circuit board rendered in neon. The space was expensive emptiness. Cold marble floors. Furniture arranged at perfect angles like pieces in a museum. Art on walls that cost more than Ashanti's entire life. A Rothko on one wall. A Basquiat on another. The kind of wealth that didn't try to be warm. It simply existed, monumental and indifferent, exactly the way power exists. Min-Jae was already there. Not waiting exactly. More like he had orchestrated this timing perfectly, like everything was part of a choreography that only he understood. "This is your new home," he said. A lawyer appeared at his side. A woman in her 50s with a face optimized by cosmetic procedures into permanent competence. Effective immediately, you are employed as a personal assistant to Min-Jae Park. Under exclusive contract. The lawyer slid a contract across the marble table. Real paper. Real ink. Real consequences. Your salary is 3 times your current backup dancer position. The lawyer continued in Korean, then switched to English when she saw Ashanti's confusion. Housing is covered, which you've already seen. Health insurance, including psychiatric coverage, is included. You will have 1 day off per week, rotating schedule. You are not to speak about the details of this arrangement to anyone, ever. Violation results in a breach of contract fee of 50 million won. That's about $40,000, Min-Jae supplied helpfully. Which I'm guessing you don't have. Ashanti read the contract. Every clause was designed to contain her. Every paragraph was a chain. There were non-disclosure agreements. There were clauses about confidentiality. There were sections about what constituted a breach and what the financial consequences would be. There were clauses about what would happen if she tried to leave. "If I don't sign," she asked. "Then arrangements will need to be made," the lawyer said, her voice professional and neutral. "Your visa gets revoked," Min-Jae translated, his voice conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "No clubs or companies in Korea will hire you. Your bank account in the US gets flagged for fraudulent activity related to illegal wire transfers. Your family back home starts receiving calls from people trying to locate you. They get worried. Then they get scared. Your entire life becomes impossible to maintain. So technically you can refuse. But that's not really an option." Ashanti's hand shook as she signed. The contract required her signature in 3 places. She signed all 3. The lawyer witnessed it. Added her own signature in a flowing script. And then it was done. Min-Jae left. The lawyer left. She was alone in the 47th floor apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and the understanding that she had been converted into a problem that someone needed to manage. At 11 p.m. Min-Jae returned. He poured whiskey without asking if she wanted any. He sat on the window seat that overlooked the entire city and looked at her like she was a book he was trying to read. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Not the version you give to auditions. Not the version you've constructed for your colleagues. The actual truth about who you are." So Ashanti told him. She told him about her mother abandoning her. She told him about her father's need to control. She told him about growing up in 2 countries and being completely accepted in neither. She told him about dance training, about being exoticized, about coming to Korea to start over. "I thought if I came here," she said, "where being Asian meant something, where there was actual Asian representation, I could exist without being treated like a curiosity. I thought I could stop being a museum piece in someone else's narrative. Instead," she finished, "I got punched in the ribs and apparently sold my soul to an idol." "You sold your discretion," he corrected. "Souls are unique. Discretion is a commodity. Much more replaceable." He took a sip of whiskey. "My father is Park Sang-joon. You've probably never heard of him. That's actually the entire point. People like him don't want publicity. We prefer to operate through influence rather than exposure." He pulled up his phone and showed her a dark constellation of news stories. Park Sang-joon connected to entertainment industry money laundering. Gangnam Clan business holdings expand into music distribution. Serif label finances questioned by financial regulators. The articles were carefully worded. Nothing explicitly criminal. Nothing that would hold up in court. But the implications were clear. There were connections between Min-Jae's label and organized crime. There were questions about where money was coming from and where it was going. There were whispered allegations about murders that never made it into official reports. I was born into this, Min-Jae said. I didn't choose it. You didn't choose to be born half-black in America. Simply what we are. The question is whether we can coexist with it, or whether we let it destroy us. He stood up. He moved to the window. He looked out at Seoul like he was calculating something about the geometry of power. Like he was mentally mapping the connections between buildings and people and organizations. You're going to live here, he said. You're going to be integrated into my public image. You're going to help normalize the idea that I make independent choices without regard for traditional hierarchies. You're going to demonstrate that my world rewards loyalty. And in exchange, you're going to be protected by resources that most people don't know exist. And if I try to leave? Ashanti asked. You won't, he said, and he sounded certain. Absolutely certain. Like he had calculated every possible variable and reached the only logical conclusion. Because invisibility is worse than this. Because being relevant, even in a situation this complicated, is better than being erased. Because the alternative is going back to being a background dancer that nobody notices. And I know you. I know that you've been invisible your entire life. I know that you came to Korea because you couldn't bear being invisible anymore. So you won't leave. Because leaving means returning to nothing. She hated that he was right. This is the moment. Would she sign? Comment yes or no and tell me why. I need to understand if she was completely insane or if you would have done the same thing. 2 weeks into living in the 47th floor apartment, Ashanti found the key. It was small brass, left in Min-Jae's study on top of a stack of papers. She shouldn't touch it. She had been explicitly told that certain rooms were off-limits. The study itself had been presented as Min-Jae's private space. His sanctuary, his place of solitude. She had been given clear boundaries, but there was something about being controlled that made you want to violate every boundary, just to confirm that you were still capable of choice. Just to prove to yourself that your will still existed somewhere underneath the layers of contract and compliance. So when Min-Jae left for a business meeting and the apartment was silent, Ashanti took the key. The door it opened was on the north side of the apartment, hidden behind what appeared to be a storage closet. The door was unmarked, unremarkable. Inside was a small room, no larger than a bedroom, no windows, just walls and lighting and surfaces covered entirely in images. Images of her. Not recent images. Images from before she met Min-Jae. Photographs of her dancing in New York. Candid shots from clubs where she was performing. Venues she hadn't thought about in months, performances she had assumed were forgotten. Images of her walking through Seoul streets when she was just another foreign backup dancer no one was paying attention to. Printed screenshots from Instagram and TikTok. Surveillance photographs that suggested professional photography equipment and professional intent. The oldest photograph was dated 2 years ago. Ashanti was 21 in that image, wearing a dance outfit in some club in Brooklyn, completely unaware that she was being documented. She looked happy. She looked like she still believed her life could be different. Min-Jae had been following her since before she came to Korea. Min-Jae had been collecting her. The realization hit Ashanti like a physical blow. She sat down on the floor, actually sat down because her legs stopped working, and tried to process what this meant. He hadn't randomly selected her from the backup dancers. He hadn't noticed her during rehearsals and decided on a whim to turn her life into his personal project. He had been planning this. He had been building toward this moment for 2 years. She was standing in the middle of the shrine when she heard the apartment door opening. She froze. For a moment she considered trying to leave, trying to pretend she hadn't been there. But there was no point. He would know. He clearly knew everything about her. He would know that she had violated his boundaries. Min-Jae found her within seconds. Like he knew exactly where she would go, which he probably did. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed almost relieved, like she had done him a favor by discovering what he couldn't quite bring himself to tell her. I've been watching you since you were dancing in New York, he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact. clinical, almost like he was explaining scientific data rather than describing stalking. I saw something in your movement that interested me. Someone trying to disappear but unable to quite manage it. Someone whose talent kept pushing them forward, even when their mind was telling them to hide. Someone whose existence kept refusing to be invisible no matter how hard they tried. You were stalking me, Ashanti said. The words felt inadequate to describe what she was seeing, but they were the only words available. I was collecting you, he corrected. Stalking implies randomness. Implies that I was following someone I knew nothing about. But I wasn't random. I made a decision. I decided that I wanted you in my life. So I made it happen. The assassination attempt, Ashanti said, was staged. Yes. He didn't deny it. He didn't soften it. He just confirmed it like they were discussing the weather. My father knows about the interest. He thinks having someone I care about makes me more functional as a person. Less likely to make impulsive decisions. More grounded. The assassination attempt was designed to position you as my savior. To bind us through trauma. To create a narrative where you're necessary. And it worked. You're here. You signed the contract. You're officially part of my life. You're insane, Ashanti said. I'm obsessed, he corrected. But I'm obsessed with you, so that makes me functional within the context of this relationship. I can be someone you care about because I care about you. I can make promises I'll keep because I actually want to keep them. I can be stable because stability means maintaining access to you. That's the closest I can get to love. Ashanti should leave. Every rational cell in her body was screaming about it. She should walk out of that apartment and never look back. She should contact the police. She should expose what he had done. But the part of her that had been broken since childhood, the part that didn't matter in her parents' divorce, the part that was invisible in dance studios, the part that had learned to make herself so small she almost disappeared, that part was listening to him explain his elaborate obsession and understanding it as intimacy. That part recognized itself in him. What happens now? She asked. Now we see whether we can build something real out of this foundation. That's what everyone does, isn't it? We build real things out of traumatic circumstance and obsessive attention, and the hope that, eventually, the trauma becomes memory and the obsession becomes love. We see whether that's possible for us. He reached out. He touched her face. His hands were gentle against her cheek. Much gentler than she expected from someone who had been following her for 2 years. I've collected every piece of you, he said. Before you even knew you were being collected. Before you knew I existed. Does that mean I've fallen in love with you? Or does that just mean I'm very good at hunting? Tell me in the comments. When someone has collected every version of you before you even knew you existed to them, is that love or is that possession? I need to understand what she is to him. The scandal hit like a missile strike. Seraph's Min-Jae spotted with mysterious Blasian woman. New relationship or industry plant? Who is Min-Jae's backup dancer companion? Fans demand answers. Foreign woman invades K-pop idol's privacy. Racist fans organize boycott. The comment sections filled with a specific kind of venom. Venom reserved for black women perceived as threatening the purity of Korean male celebrities. The internet became a space of pure hostility. There were demands that she be deported. There were calls for boycotts of Seraph. There were slurs rendered in Korean that somehow hit harder because she was beginning to understand the language. She was beginning to understand exactly what people thought she was. Yanggangju, the slur for Korean women who fraternize with American soldiers, now repurposed for any woman who crossed racial boundaries. The word appeared thousands of times a day in comments and threads and social media posts. Ashanti searched herself and found videos of people she had never met declaring her a danger to Korean culture. She found tweets with hundreds of thousands of likes calling her subhuman. She found Instagram threads organizing campaigns to make sure she understood that she didn't belong there. That she never had belonged. That her presence in Korea was an infection that needed to be treated. The racism was systematic. It wasn't individual hatred, though that was certainly present. It was infrastructure. It was the result of decades of media that treated Korean men like precious commodities, and everything foreign like contamination. It was a racial hierarchy so deeply embedded in the culture that people didn't even question it anymore. It just was. One thread had collected her home address. Another had compiled her phone number and encouraged people to call her, and explain why she should kill herself. Another had photoshopped her face onto images of black women in pornography and captioned them with statements about her racial inferiority. The death threat started simple and escalated from there. I hope you get raped by a group of soldiers before you die. Your mixed blood makes you an abomination. You disgrace Korea. If you don't leave Korea within 1 week, I will make sure you do. She was terrified. She was also somehow more visible than she had ever been in her life. Min-Jae watched her reading the comments. He didn't comfort her. Instead, he educated her. Notice the structure, he said. They were in the apartment, and he was looking over her shoulder at her phone, reading the hate with the detached interest of someone studying a biological specimen. First layer is racism. They don't think you should be in Korea. They think you're inherently inferior. Your blackness is pollution. That's the baseline. Second layer is xenophobia. You're not just black, you're foreign, which means you're stealing an opportunity from a Korean girl. You've taken a job, taken visibility, taken access to Min-Jae that they believe they're entitled to. Third layer is gender. You're a woman close to their male idol, which violates their fantasy about what relationship they could have with him, if only the circumstances aligned differently. That's a lot of hate, Ashanti said. That's Korea, he corrected. Or that's one version of Korea. The version that lives online. The version manufactured by decades of media treating Korean women as audience rather than participants, Korean men as precious, and foreigners as problems to be managed. The version that treats women like you as acceptable targets for whatever violence the internet wants to inflict. The threats escalated. Someone posted her address. Someone sent her a package with a photograph of her face covered in blood. Someone created a fake account and messaged her daily with increasingly specific suggestions about how she should kill herself. The psychological weight of it was crushing. Every notification became a source of dread. Every message might be another threat. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She existed in a state of constant terror. But the strangest part was that the terror came alongside a certain kind of relief. For her entire life, Ashanti had been invisible. Now she was hypervisible. People knew her name. People were thinking about her. They might be thinking about her with hatred, but they were thinking about her. She had finally been noticed. The cost of that visibility was higher than she had anticipated, but at least she wasn't invisible anymore. You have a choice, Min-Jae said one evening. Fight this or accept it. Most people accept it. Most people internalize the hatred and become smaller than they already were. What if I want to fight? Ashanti asked. Then you're fighting institutional infrastructure. You're fighting media narratives that have been decades in the making. You're fighting a racial hierarchy that places Korean ethnicity at the top and everything else at various gradations below it. You're fighting the fact that Korea doesn't even have real anti-discrimination laws, because there's no public consensus that discrimination is something that needs to be addressed. You're fighting very powerful people who benefit from your erasure. Are you one of those people? She asked. He smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. I'm the proof that the system works. I'm a Korean man, I'm beautiful, I'm wealthy, I'm from a powerful family. I don't experience the barriers that you're experiencing. I benefit from your invisibility. So yes, technically, I'm one of those people. Then something shifted. Ashanti's name started appearing in official press releases. She was introduced as Min-Jae's personal assistant. There were carefully framed photographs of them together, composed, professional, designed to communicate a specific narrative. The label's PR team managed the narrative carefully. Certain agitators were quietly removed from social media platforms through legal pressure applied by the label's legal department. The racism was still there, but it was being contained. She was being normalized. By the third week, there were K-pop fan accounts defending her. There were people arguing about whether she deserved to exist in Korean spaces. There was actual debate happening, which was its own kind of progress, she supposed. At least people were acknowledging that she existed. At least there was discussion rather than unanimous condemnation. Min-Jae's father appeared at the apartment one evening. He came unannounced, which Ashanti realized meant something. He didn't ask for entry. He simply entered. He moved through the space like he owned it, which he probably did. He was exactly what Ashanti expected. Powerful, controlled, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical violence. He looked at her the way a jeweler looked at a stone, assessing value, clarity, utility. The backup dancer, he said in Korean, his accent suggesting expensive American education and international business connections. He switched to English when he saw Ashanti's confusion. The one who interrupted destiny. The one who prevented my son's death. She prevented a specific kind of problem, Min-Jae said. She showed him he was vulnerable. She became his weakness. She's now the reason he's more careful, more controlled, more functional. Park Sang-joon reached out and touched Ashanti's face. His touch was colder than Min-Jae's. Less intimate. More evaluative. More like he was testing a product to see if it met specifications. You understand what you've become? He asked in English. You've become a liability that's been transformed into an asset. When you saved my son's life, you created an obligation. But obligations are dangerous. They require maintenance. They require understanding boundaries. Specifically, they require that you understand you're useful precisely to the extent that you don't become a burden. If you become a burden, if you start believing that your proximity to my son means you're protected by my resources, if you start thinking of yourself as family, you will be corrected very quickly. Do you understand? Yes, Ashanti said, and the word tasted like compliance. Like the death of any possibility that she had actual choice. Good. He removed his hand. Then we can proceed with the arrangement. By normalizing your presence, we accomplish several things. First, we demonstrate that international talent is valuable in Korean entertainment. Second, we demonstrate that my family makes independent choices without regard for public opinion or traditional hierarchies. Third, and most importantly, we demonstrate that in my world, loyalty is rewarded. That people who are useful are protected. That people who understand their place in a larger ecosystem are treated well. Do you see? She saw. She saw that her existence had been converted into a tool. The whole world is calling her slurs and telling her to leave Korea. If you were Ashanti, would you burn the contract and run? Or stay and burn the world with him? Choose now in the comments. I'm screening every response. The vehicle behind them was professional. Aggressive. Exactly the kind of driving that suggested people who knew what they were doing. Ashanti was returning from the market with ingredients for Min-Jae's private chef. She had been entrusted with small responsibilities that suggested deeper integration into his life. The security driver, a man named Park who never spoke beyond what was necessary, didn't speak until the traffic pattern changed. We're being tailed, he said. His voice was flat, professional. Protocol red. Red meant something serious. She didn't know exactly what, but the way his entire body shifted suggested that this was a situation he had trained for. His hands tightened on the wheel. His posture changed. Every muscle in his body went alert. He accelerated. The car lurched forward, merging aggressively into traffic. Seoul streets became a blur. The vehicles behind them gained. Officers approaching, someone said through the radio. 2 minutes out. Hold position. Relief flooded through Ashanti. The police were coming. Safety was arriving. Everything was going to be fine. Then the security driver slammed the brakes so hard that Ashanti nearly hit the dashboard. That's not, Park said firmly. His eyes fixed on the vehicles ahead of them. Because the uniforms were wrong. Ashanti noticed it immediately. Her eye had learned to read details in the past few weeks. The insignia was off by just enough to be almost unnoticeable. The lights on the vehicles were the right color but the wrong intensity. The proportions of the uniforms didn't quite match standard Korean police issue. These were people in police uniforms, not actual police, which was a much more dangerous thing. We're being herded, Park said. His voice remained calm. We're being driven to a location where they have operational control. That's not happening. He floored the accelerator. They exploded out of the traffic. Vehicles scattered. Horns blared. Park wasn't trying to escape quietly anymore. He was making a scene. He was drawing actual police attention. He was creating chaos so intense that these fake officers couldn't maintain their cover. The fake police fell back. Real police moved in confused, responding to reports of reckless driving, establishing order. Vehicles screeched to stops. Officers with actual authority and actual uniforms poured out of vehicles, weapons drawn. It was terrifying and also perfectly orchestrated. Ashanti realized later that this must have been a test. This must have been Min-Jae's security team learning whether their procedures would actually work if challenged. This was training that just happened to involve a real threat. When she arrived back at the apartment, Min-Jae was waiting. He was sitting on the window seat, his favorite position, looking out at Seoul like nothing had happened. "My father is making a move," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the certainty of someone who understood how his father operated. Or someone who believes they can use my father's reputation to legitimize a move against me. Either way, you were the target because you're the person I'm least protected against. You're the person I care about. Do you care about me? Ashanti asked. I'm not sure I care about anything, he said. But you're the closest I've come to it. That night, alone in the guest room, because they had agreed to sleep separately, maintaining plausible deniability about the actual nature of their relationship, Ashanti lay awake and realized something that made her want to scream. She was broken. She had been broken since the moment she signed that contract. She had been so starved for visibility, for relevance, for someone to actually see her and value her, that she was willing to accept visibility that came with death threats and racism, and the constant terror of being a commodity that might lose its value. That wasn't love. That was trauma bonding. That was the specific mechanism of control. Isolate, threaten, then provide safety from the threats you created. That was the exact psychological pattern that she had sworn she understood academically, but didn't actually experience until she was inside it. And knowing it didn't change anything. Because the alternative was invisibility. The alternative was returning to being a background dancer that nobody noticed. That life might be safer, but it wasn't a life. At least this was real. At least this was the opposite of invisible. Be honest. If someone has been following you before you even knew they existed, is that a love story or a stalker story? Comment your answer. I'm asking because I need to know the difference. The Red Room didn't exist on any map. It wasn't listed on any website. It wasn't something that could be found through normal channels. It was a Gangnam underground club where certain people gathered, Yakuza entertainment executives with organized crime connections, corrupt politicians who had learned that money was more stable than law, wealthy women who had learned that in a patriarchal society, the only way to have power was to align yourself with the men who had power and then take small pieces whenever possible. It existed in the spaces between spaces, in the basements beneath restaurants, in the tunnels connecting buildings, in the networks of wealthy people who preferred their businesses to remain invisible. Ashanti and Min-Jae arrived through a service entrance. No velvet rope. No normal entry process. Just a door, security scanning, and then they were descending. The room was exactly what Min-Jae had promised. Velvet ropes, dark red lighting, heavy bass that made the walls vibrate. The light was designed to make everyone look vaguely menacing, vaguely beautiful, vaguely dangerous. It was sultry and terrifying simultaneously. Don't drink anything you didn't see prepared, Min-Jae told her. His voice was low, close to her ear. Don't go to the bathroom alone. Don't make eye contact with the men at the table in the corner. They're considering a takeover of my father's operations, and if they perceive you as leverage, we'll have a problem. And for God's sake, don't ask anyone about their business. Everyone here is engaged in something that, if publicly revealed, would result in significant legal consequences. Why did you bring me? Ashanti asked. Because you're part of my public narrative now. Being seen with you demonstrates that I'm confident in my position, that I don't hide the people close to me. It shows stability. It shows that I'm not afraid of the associations that might be drawn from your presence. And what associations are those? She asked. That I'm being groomed to take over certain aspects of my father's operation. That I'm old enough, smart enough, ruthless enough to handle the complexities of operating businesses that exist in legal gray areas. Being comfortable with you, being comfortable with someone that Korean society views as inherently inferior, someone who's experienced discrimination and still maintained presence, that suggests I'm comfortable making decisions that conventional wisdom would oppose. That I'm my father's son in the ways that matter. Ashanti realized that her presence was being weaponized as proof of his independence. Her blackness, her foreignness, her very existence as someone Korea viewed as contamination, all of it was being converted into a tool for demonstrating power. Then Park Sang-joon appeared. Min-Jae's father. He moved through the Red Room like he owned it. Everyone deferred to him. Conversations quieted when he passed. He was clearly the most powerful person in the room, and everyone understood it. He looked at Ashanti the way a jeweler looked at a stone, assessing value, clarity, potential utility. The backup dancer, he said in Korean. Min-Jae translated, which seemed to amuse him. The one who interrupted destiny. The one who prevented my son's death. She prevented a specific kind of problem, Min-Jae said in Korean. Responding in his father's language, drawing a line between the public English-speaking Min-Jae and this version. She showed him he was vulnerable. She became his weakness. She's now the reason he's more careful, more controlled, more functional. Park Sang-joon reached out and touched Ashanti's face. His touch was colder than Min-Jae's. Less intimate. More evaluative. More like he was testing a product to see if it met specifications. His fingers traced her jawline, assessing bone structure. Assessing whether she was beautiful enough to be useful. You understand what you've become? He asked in English, his accent suggesting expensive American education and business connections in major American cities. You've become a liability that's been transformed into an asset. When you saved my son's life, you created an obligation between our family and yourself. But obligations are dangerous. They require maintenance. They require that you understand the boundaries. Specifically, they require that you understand that you are useful precisely to the extent that you don't become a burden. If you become a burden, if you start thinking of yourself as family, if you start believing that your proximity to my son means you're protected by my resources, you will be corrected very quickly. Do you understand? Yes, Ashanti said, and the word tasted like compliance. Like the death of any possibility that she had actual choice. Good. He removed his hand. Then we can proceed with the arrangement. By normalizing your presence, we accomplish several things. First, we demonstrate that international talent is valuable in Korean entertainment. Second, we demonstrate that my family makes independent choices without regard for public opinion or traditional hierarchies. Third, and most importantly, we demonstrate that in my world, loyalty is rewarded. That people who are useful are protected. That people who understand their place in a larger ecosystem are treated well. Do you see? She saw. She saw that her blackness, her foreignness, her entire being had been converted into a statement. Into a tool for communication. Into proof of concept. What happens to me after this? She asked. That depends on whether you continue to be useful, Park Sang-joon said. That depends on whether you maintain discretion. That depends on whether you understand that the life you had before you saved my son's life is over. And this life, this version of you, is what you are now. That's permanent. Can you accept that? This is the moment where everything should have ended. Comment your honest thought. Is she a victim or is she choosing this? The answer matters because it changes everything about how we judge what comes next. The Seoul Music Awards were live-streamed to 40 million people worldwide. The production was massive. The venue was enormous. The anticipation was electric. Every news outlet in Korea had been counting down to the performance. Every social media platform had been flooded with predictions about what Seraph would do, how they would top their previous performances, how they would maintain their dominance of the K-pop industry. Min-Jae was scheduled to perform as the opening act. He would be performing solo. A new direction for him, showcasing his vulnerability, his artistry, his ability to command a stage alone. The single had climbed charts worldwide. The album had sold 2 million copies in the first week. Ashanti was backstage in the green room watching him prepare. Watching him get styled. Watching him slip into the white suit that had become his signature. Watching him become Min-Jae the angel, Min-Jae the idol, Min-Jae the person that 40 million people worshipped without knowing the real version. His manager rushed in with something on her phone. The color drained from her face. That was the only warning Ashanti got. The performance began normally. Min-Jae was perfect, white suit immaculate, movement precise, voice carrying across the arena like he was made of light. He was 3 minutes into the final chorus when someone rushed the stage. The man had a knife. But unlike the assassination attempt at the Dome, this knife wasn't hidden. This knife was being displayed. This knife was being used. Min-Jae didn't try to escape. For a moment, just a moment, he stood there and let it happen. Like he had anticipated this. Like he had orchestrated it. The blade went into his side. The white suit bloomed red. Blood spread across the pristine fabric like a stain that couldn't be removed. He collapsed. But before he hit the ground, before the security team reacted, before the screaming started, he looked directly into the camera. He looked directly at Ashanti watching from backstage. He smiled. And in that smile she understood everything. This was planned. This was another performance. This was another demonstration of his power and his control. He had just proven that he could survive even when he was stabbed on live television. He had proven that he could manipulate 40 million people simultaneously. He had proven that he could do whatever he wanted because the world was too shocked to stop him. The stabbing wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random attack. It was a message. And the message was directed at her. It was a message that said, I am willing to bleed for you. I am willing to destroy myself to prove my commitment. I am willing to do whatever it takes to keep you in my world. This is what love looks like when it comes from me. This is the question. Does she try to save him again, or does she finally understand what he is? Comment what you think happens next. I need to know what you think she should do. Min-Jae went missing after the awards. Not dramatically. Not with news coverage or speculation. He simply didn't return from his scheduled recovery period. The hospital released him after 7 hours. Official statement. Stabbing was superficial. No vital organs damaged. Full recovery expected. The label released a statement about Min-Jae taking time for health and personal reasons. The staff in the apartment said they had no information. The security team responded to Ashanti's questions with professional blankness that suggested this had happened before. It was a planned disappearance. She waited through dinner she couldn't eat. She waited through the night watching news coverage and social media speculation. She waited through the morning, watching the internet construct narratives out of fragments and doubt. Was he injured? Was he in a psychiatric facility? Was he making a statement about something? The speculation was endless and pointless. At 3 a.m. on the third day she found the key again. The shrine had been updated. The newest photographs were from that week. Photographs of her watching him perform from backstage. Photographs of her standing in the wings during rehearsals. Photographs of her in his apartment when she didn't know she was being documented. There were videos. Hundreds of hours of surveillance footage converted into a love story that was actually a horror film disguised as romance. There was a new wall. On this wall were newspaper clippings showing injuries from the stabbing. Medical reports. Documentation of his recovery. Recovery that should have taken weeks but clearly hadn't. And at the center, a photograph of her, taken from a security camera in the green room, with a red circle around her face and a single sentence written underneath in Min-Jae's handwriting. This is the moment when everything becomes real. He found her before she could leave the room. He appeared in the doorway like he had been waiting for her to discover this. Like he had left this discovery out as bait. I've been perfecting the narrative, he said. He was injured but standing. Moving like each step caused pain but refusing to acknowledge it. The stabbing was necessary. It proved that I'm powerful enough to survive even when I'm destroyed. It proved that I'm willing to destroy myself to demonstrate power. It proved that you matter enough to me to put myself at risk. You're not at risk, Ashanti said. You planned it. I planned the stabbing, he corrected. But the feelings were real. When I saw you watching from backstage, when I felt the blade enter my body, when I chose to smile instead of scream, all of that was real. That was me showing you exactly what you are to me. You're the reason I bled in front of 40 million people. You're the reason I let myself be vulnerable. That's love, Ashanti. That's what my version of love looks like. This isn't love, she said. This is obsession. What's the difference? He asked. Both are about being unable to imagine your life without someone. Both are about being willing to destroy yourself if it means maintaining connection. Both are about choosing someone over your own survival. That's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing since the moment I saw you dancing in New York. Ashanti should leave. Every rational cell in her body was screaming about it. The shrine, the surveillance, the stalking, the obsession. All of it added up to something that couldn't be reconciled with genuine love. But she was standing in a shrine made of her own image, with a man who had bled on international television to prove his commitment, and she was realizing that she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of going back to being invisible. Real question. If someone proves their love by nearly dying, is that romance or is that manipulation? I'm asking because I actually don't know the answer anymore. The apartment was silent except for the sound of Seoul at night, distant traffic, the hum of air conditioning, the constant whisper of a city that never actually slept. Min-Jae was sitting on the window seat, the same place he always sat, looking out at the lights like he was calculating something about the geometry of power. He had been sitting there for hours, not moving, just thinking, processing something that seemed to be weighing on him in a way that made Ashanti wonder if she had finally done something to break through his carefully constructed persona. "I want you to leave," he said. "What?" Ashanti asked. "I want you to leave. Pack a bag. Call a cab. Disappear. Go back to America. Start over. Actually escape from this." "You're joking," she said. "I'm not." He turned to face her. His expression was serious in a way that suggested he had made a decision and was committed to it. "The problem with someone like me, someone like my father, is that we're good at converting people into tools. We're good at making you feel like you chose this. We're good at making obsession feel like love. We're good at making trauma bonding feel like intimacy. We're very good at it. And I've been so good at this specific version that I think you're starting to believe it. I think you're starting to forget that you had a choice once." "I don't want to leave," Ashanti said. "That's because I've perfected the cage," he said. "But the cage doesn't change what's happening. You're still trapped. You're still a liability being managed as an asset. You're still my possession disguised as my partner. And if you stay much longer, you won't remember the difference between the cage and the world. You won't remember what it felt like to be invisible. You won't remember that there are other ways to exist." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I'm tired," Min-Jae said, and for the first time he sounded actually human. "I'm tired of performing. I'm tired of maintaining the narrative. I'm tired of perfecting a version of love that's actually just control. I'm tired of being my father's son. I'm tired of using people to prove power and then pretending it was affection. I'm tired of existing in a system where everything I do, every relationship I form, is designed to demonstrate control and dominance, rather than genuine connection." He stood up. He walked to the door. The gesture was deliberate. He was physically removing himself from the space, creating distance, creating the possibility that she could leave. "If you want to leave, the door is open. I'll have my father's people make sure your visa issue is resolved. I'll have them make sure the people threatening you online understand that they need to stop. I'll give you resources for therapy. I'll give you everything except myself because I finally understand that I'm the thing that needs to be escaped from. That everything beautiful about this relationship is actually a version of damage. That loving me is a choice between different kinds of destruction, and I won't let you make that choice without understanding it first." "What if I don't want to leave?" Ashanti asked. "Then you need to understand what that means," he said. "It means you're choosing to stay in a cage. It means you're choosing trauma bonding over genuine connection. It means you're choosing me not because you love me but because you're afraid of being invisible again. And that's okay. That's human. But don't lie to yourself about why you're staying. Don't convert your fear into love. That's what my father does. That's what I've been trained to do. Don't become what we've been trying to make you." He opened the door. Behind him, the apartment stretched into shadow. "I'm leaving for 3 days," he said. "The choice is yours. When I come back, the door is either locked or open. Either way, I'll respect it. Either way, I'll never look back. I'll let you disappear. I'll let you be invisible again. And I'll accept that the version of you that I created exists only in the shrine, in the photographs, in the surveillance footage. The real version of you, the one making a choice right now, that version belongs to yourself, not to me." He left. Ashanti was alone in the 47th floor apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and the understanding that she had exactly 72 hours to decide who she wanted to be. She could leave. She could walk out. She could return to New York. She could return to invisibility. She could return to being a backup dancer that nobody noticed. She could return to the safety of not matching. Or she could stay. She could accept the cage. She could accept the obsession. She could accept that this was the closest she would ever get to being someone's priority. She could accept that the love she was receiving was damaged and complicated and wrong, but it was real in the ways that invisibility had never been real. 3 days. That was all she had to decide. This is the question I need you to answer. When someone gives you a genuine choice after manipulating you for months, is the choice actually real? Or are they just manipulating you in a different way? Comment your answer because I literally cannot figure this out. When a man gives you an exit, you have to decide whether you take it. When a man proves his love through obsession and violence and surveillance and reconstruction of your entire reality, you have to decide whether that's the only kind of love you'll ever receive. When a man asks you to choose yourself, you have to decide whether you're capable of existing without someone else defining your value. This is where the story gets complicated. This is where the romance becomes either redemption or destruction, and the difference between those two things is smaller than we would like to admit. But before he tells you what happens next, he wants to know where you are watching from. Comment your country's flag. Tell him what you think she does. Tell him whether you think she leaves or stays. Tell him whether you think this is a love story or a horror film disguised as romance. Comment your honest answer because the direction of this entire narrative depends on what you think she should do. And he's replying to every single comment. He wants to understand how people rationalize obsession. He wants to know whether you see Min-Jae as villain or anti-hero. He wants to understand whether this is describing love or describing abuse, and whether those categories are actually different. Comment below. Tell him what happens next. Tell him who Ashanti is supposed to become. This is your story now. You get to decide whether this is a love story or a tragedy. You get to decide whether Ashanti escapes or accepts the cage. You get to decide whether Min-Jae is capable of redemption, or whether he's irredeemable. Comment below. Your voice will determine everything.